Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. On this program, we look at articles from Creation Magazine, our ministry's flagship publication for more than 30 years now. And we're just going to read through them, and you can follow the articles that way and look up the details on creation.com.
Well, this is a great article from Creation Magazine, Volume 29, Number 1, so that's the December 2006 issue. And the title of the article is called The Fall, A Glorious Necessity, How Mormons Muddle Genesis. And, many people might be familiar with, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, and sometimes I think even people that perhaps aren't familiar think that somehow maybe Mormonism is a Christian denomination or something like that, when in fact it is far outside of any, real Christian denomination. So the article here is quite long. We probably won't be able to get through all of it, but it's going to highlight some of the differences between what Mormons believe and what Genesis says in particular.
Because it's Creation Magazine, but it's not just science-y stuff all the time.
Right.
Here we've got an article that helps Christians think about other religions, kind of a world religions course in Creation Magazine.
That's
type
right.
Of thing.
Of course, it deals with Genesis. This is by Maxwell Brown. Our view is that Adam made a good decision, a Mormon replied when I asked him about Adam and Eve partaking of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He was only echoing a position consistently held by Mormon prophets and apostles. Mormon apostle Dallin H. Oakes called the fall a glorious necessity, and Elder Jess L. Christensen declared that it would have been a terrific calamity if they had refrained from taking of the fruit of the tree.
Wow.
So this is completely different than what a Christian would believe,
totally
obviously. We believe the fall wasn't a good thing, and that's why people die and get colds and all the other bad things that happen in this world. But it goes on to say, my Mormon friend also told me that he believed that Adolf Hitler would be saved along with Mother Teresa. While I needed to clarify what he meant by saved, see later, it's clear from this remark that points of agreement between Mormons and Christians are superficial when compared with differences. It's to be expected that a wrong interpretation of the events of Genesis, in this case the fall, will inevitably lead to a misunderstanding of the gospel.
Of course.
Now here's a situation where their understanding of the fall is actually completely different. Now, you might have a Christian who believes in theistic evolution or long ages or something like that, but typically, even if they think the fall is an allegory or something like that, they still think it's like, no, there was a good creation, and then Adam transgressed, or man rebelled against God, or something like that. Yeah, it changed, and it wasn't a good thing. A proper understanding of salvation depends on a correct understanding of where we came from, why we are here, and what's wrong with the world. When interacting with Mormons, Christians should do well to focus on the fall, since it is foundational to the gospel. Falling forward. Mormons, officially the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, acknowledge that the fall of Adam was a historical event, but they also say that the fall had a twofold direction, downward and yet forward. The Bible is only one of 4 books that the Mormons get their doctrines from, called standard works: the Book of Mormon, the Bible, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. The Book of Mormon says, and now behold, if Adam had not transgressed, he would not have fallen, but he would have remained in the Garden of Eden, and all things which were created must have remained in the same state in which they were created, and they must have remained forever and had no end, and they would have had no children, wherefore they would have remained in a state of innocence, having no joy, for they knew no misery, doing no good, for they knew no sin. Now that's
how many errors are in that statement?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you actually look at that,
they would have had no children, and yet God, before the curse, commanded them to be fruitful and multiply.
That's right.
That's just one. I mean,
that's just one. And even concepts like they would have, they would have no joy because they would know no misery. Well, that means that you can't, unless you're miserable, you can't experience joy. This really takes the concept of the fall. I mean, what are we looking for as a Christian? I have this blessed hope that God's going to restore the world to the way it was in the beginning. No pain, no death, no sorrow. That's what we're looking forward to. Well, if we started like that, why would we have wanted to get away from that?
Right.
This is a completely different take on things, of course. But anyway, good for people to know what, when you see, typically you'll see 2 Mormons coming along and they're on bikes, or they're coming around to your door and they've got their tags on it. It says Elder John, or, whatever like that.
Yeah.
It's good to know what they have in their minds before you engage them in conversation.
Sure.
Mormons believe that Adam and Eve had physical bodies not yet subject to death and not yet capable of procreation. Again, this is, if you just read the Bible, it says they're supposed to reproduce.
Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Not the Bible.
Not the Bible. Mormon leaders have not clearly stated why a man and a woman living in completed creation and free from the effects of physical and spiritual corruption were not able to procreate. Some Mormons have suggested that the fall brought about required changes in their bodies, including the circulation of blood and other modifications as well. I mean, you got some pretty amazing, and when God says the life is in the blood, they're saying that maybe there wasn't even blood flow before.
Right. Yeah, throw that passage that you just mentioned into the mix too. The life is in the blood.
Yeah. But this is contrary to the Bible's teaching that God finished creating on the sixth day and that all he had made was very good, which is Genesis 1:31. Surely functional reproductive systems were part of a completed creation, especially since God commanded Adam and Eve to increase in number. And when we look at the rest of the creation, you know, we've got animals, and Adam named the animals, and he said, well, you know, there's a male and a female that they can reproduce, and of course he was looking for a mate. That's why God created Eve, and so a lot of things here we need to look at. It's even more difficult to understand how the introduction of sin and death into the world played a positive role in enabling them to have offspring. From a biblical perspective, complications in conception and birth defects are associated with the curse, but Mormons link the ability to reproduce with the introduction of death into the world. Very, very interesting take on things. And again, you would not get any of that from just reading your Bible.
No.
You'd have to read these other writings and so on.
Right. And an understanding of the fall is critical to understanding the gospel. And that's where this article gets to eventually. Many other interesting things in here, how they misunderstand what happened back there so many years ago in Eden.
That's right.
And just without that fall into sin, the whole gospel falls apart.
That's
and
right.
there have been, even within the Christian church, I mean, the Mormons are outside of the Christian church, but with it, debates, intramural debates among Christians, as we wrestle through the various doctrines over 2,000 years of history. There have been Christians who've had distorted views of the effects of the fall.
Right.
And those heresies, then there's a church council, and those things are discussed. But this is along the lines of one of those ideas, that eventually, if you work it through to its logical conclusion, it destroys the gospel.
Right. Because typically you'll see many non-believers say, well, if you've got such a loving God, how come there's so much pain and death and, you know, the bad things in the world? And of course we can explain that through the fall. But just like a theistic evolutionist, when somebody is a Christian, they say, well, I believe God used evolution, and their friend says, well, why is there so much pain and death in the world? Well, if you believe God used evolution to create, you believe that death and pain, that's all just part of how God creates. That's the way God wanted it. So therefore, death and pain and suffering isn't a bad thing in a sense.
Yes. According to evolution, there have been billions and billions of unfit varieties of animals that if God used evolution, all of those animals went extinct to try to evolve something better, eventually ending up in people.
Yes. And so here we have the same problem, and as you check out the article, you can go to creation.com or pick up a back issue. You can see that we kind of arrive in the same place where now God used bad things. As a matter of fact, he wanted Adam to sin in order to make good things come about, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. So anyway, encourage people to check that out. You can go to creation.com and just type in keywords like Mormon, and you'll have access to the article.